The Targaryens and the Hightowers may be the ones to keep the drama alive in HBO's House of the Dragon, but we all know that the dragons are the real heroes of the show, and all of George R.R. Martin's books. 300 years before the events of Game of Thrones, the dragons ruled all of Westeros, and in today's video, we're going to introduce you to one such ancient beast, from being an unclaimed dragon abandoned in the dragon pit, to becoming the fastest creature that roamed the Seven Kingdoms. Meleys has come a long way in the Fire and Blood lore, as the trusty mount of Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, known as the Red Queen of the Skies. Meleys makes a bombastic appearance in House of the Dragon Season 1, as she crashes the coronation of Aegon Targaryen II, before flying away to Dragonstone. Want to know more about this ancient, enigmatic dragon and her legacy? We've got you covered. So let's begin, shall we? Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who is Meleys? Here's a proper introduction to Meleys. In House of the Dragon, Meleys is presented as the she-dragon of a feisty but cool-headed Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, who came to be known as the Queen Who Never Was. That's because when Balon Targaryen died, Princess Rhaenys was one of the contenders for the throne, but the High Council favored a male heir, such as Rhaenys' cousin Viserys, over her. During the show, Rhaenys was in her mid-50s, and as fearless as she was in her younger days, which is, however, not the case with her dragon. Meleys was once the fastest dragon ever, one who would easily outrun the likes of Caraxes and Vhagar in 75 AC. It's believed that Meleys is possibly a descendant of the oldest dragons, Vhagar, Balerion, and Meraxes, the three dragons that Aegon Targaryen the Conqueror brought with him to Westeros to conquer the Seven Kingdoms. In 75 AC, Meleys resided in the dragon pits of the capital city of King's Landing, and remained unclaimed for a while, till Alyssa Targaryen arrived to zero in on her ride. Princess Alyssa was the fifth-born child of Queen Alysanne Targaryen and Jaehaerys Targaryen I, who was the Targaryen king from 48 AC to 103 AC. Alyssa Targaryen was the mother of King Viserys Targaryen from House of the Dragon, and the aunt of Princess Rhaenys. As a young princess who had a warrior's heart and zeal, Alyssa wanted a dragon as speedy and feisty as her own self, and she initially selected Balerion, aka the Black Dread from the Dragon Pit. When the Dragon Keepers persuaded her to go for a swifter dragon, Alyssa finally bonded with Meleys, and the two were kind of inseparable then onward. Soon enough, Meleys proved to be more agile than the dragons of Alyssa's brothers. Meleys went on countless adventures across the sky with Alyssa, to the point that when Alyssa had her first child in 77 AC, the future King Viserys, she strapped her 9-day-old son to her body and flew around on Meleys. When Alyssa gave birth to her second son, Daemon, she took him on a ride on Meleys within just 2 weeks. In the future, Viserys rode the OG dragon Balerion, the Black Dread, until the mighty beast died of old age, and Daemon claimed Caraxes, which was previously ridden by his uncle, Prince Aemon Targaryen. In 84 AC, Meleys was left companionless once again, when Alyssa died following a complicated childbirth. For 3 years, Meleys remained within the dragon pits all alone, till she was reclaimed by Rhaenys Targaryen in 87 AC. One of Meleys' earliest adventures with Rhaenys included flying to Highgarden to accompany Jaehaerys Targaryen I on his royal progress to the Shield Islands. During Princess Rhaenys' wedding to Lord Corlys Velaryon in 90 AC, she insisted on arriving for the ceremony riding on Meleys. In the House of the Dragon TV show, Rhaenys flies to King's Landing riding on Meleys during the wedding festivities of her son Laenor Velaryon and Viserys' daughter Rhaenyra Targaryen. This is the first time that we see Meleys in live action, and she indeed turns out to be a sight to behold. After King Viserys' death, Queen Alicent Hightower conspired to quickly place her son Aegon II on the throne, instead of Viserys' chosen heir, his daughter Princess Rhaenyra. This decision was not supported by Rhaenys, and she was kept locked up in the Red Keep, separated from her dragon Meleys. But Rhaenys managed to escape the confines and reunite with Meleys in the Dragon Pit, resulting in a mind-boggling sequence of the two crashing Aegon's coronation ceremony. Before flying away to Dragonstone to warn Rhaenyra Targaryen of Alicent Hightower's treachery, Meleys let out a blood-curdling roar that pretty much established the fact that Meleys has signed up for Team Rhaenyra, also known as the Blacks. Then onwards in the book Fire and Blood, Meleys becomes Rhaenys' constant companion during the Dance of the Dragon events, which is the civil war between Rhaenyra and Aegon II for the Iron Throne. Meleys circled around in the sky and guarded Lord Corlys noticed Valyrian's fleet in the sea. That blocked off the sea route between King's Landing to Dragonstone. Instructed by Rhaenys, Meleys was to protect the Valyrian fleet if the Greens attempted to attack from the south. However, during the battle at Rook's Rest, when the castle was infiltrated by Sir Criston Cole of the Greens, Prince Rhaenys left the patrolling of the seas and arrived to help. But this was actually an ambush, as both Aemon Targaryen and Aegon II appeared on their dragons, Vhagar and Sunfire, and launched a coordinated attack. While Meleys could have taken on Vhagar alone, she could not hold off the combined attacks of both dragons. The three dragons exchanged fire breaths some 1,000 feet above the ground, and when Vhagar fell on them, all three came crashing down. The violent crash ripped apart Meleys. The crash was so impactful that it dismantled the stones of the Rook's Rest battle structures half a league away. Meleys never survived the crash, and neither did her rider Rhaenys. A charred corpse believed to be of the Targaryen princess was discovered near Meleys' fallen body. Aegon II made an example of Meleys' death by putting her severed head on a cart and dragging it across King's Landing to silence the small folk into submission. The deaths of Rhaenys and Meleys was so shocking that the townspeople started deserting King's Landing till Alicent Hightower ordered the shutting of the gates. Compared to other dragons we've seen, how big is Meleys? Meleys is the second largest dragon on the show after Vhagar. As a second-generation dragon who's been around for decades, Meleys comes with a formidable size. Her natural defenses, such as retractable spikes on her head and neck, further give her a larger appearance. In the coronation scene inside the sept, Meleys burst out of the dragon pit below, creating a large crater at the center of the sept. By the looks of it, the royal sept can accommodate thousands of people, and presumably has a width of at least around 300 feet inside. Interestingly, Meleys could fit into the sept with her wings and her long tail, and maneuver around just comfortably enough, which means that she must measure around half of the sept's presumed depth, and that brings her to around 150 to 160 feet. When Meleys gets really close to Aegon and Alicent inside the sept, they look like miniatures in front of him. Meleys' head appears to be the length of around 2 average-sized humans, which makes it around 10 to 11 feet in length, and mind you, that's just the head. From the aerial shots, one can surmise that Meleys' wingspan is double of her body length, and that makes it a whopping 300 feet of wing area. No wonder Meleys was the fastest dragon in her prime. Meleys' tail, which is just as long as her body, also helps her flight power. Her tail swipe inside the sept sends hundreds of people flying and falling into the crater. Now let's see where Meleys ranks on the size scale when compared to the biggest dragons we've seen so far. Balerion the Black Dread is the biggest dragon in George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood lore, who could gulp down a horse and its rider in one go, and could cover entire towns in darkness while flying. Balerion never makes it to live-action TV and is more like a myth, making Vhagar the largest dragon that appears in House of the Dragon. Now, Vhagar is significantly longer than Meleys, and must measure up to at least 240 to 250 feet in length, which is 100 meters more than Meleys. Owing to her big size, Vhagar also has an overwhelmingly huge wingspan, which can shroud Meleys in complete darkness while flying above. When compared with Daemon Targaryen's dragon Caraxes, also one of the older dragons, Caraxes measured around a little more than half of Vhagar's length, which puts him at around 140 to 150 feet, around the same length or slightly shorter than Meleys. When compared with Drogon, however, the 130-foot-long dragon owned by Daenerys Targaryen in Game of Thrones, Meleys turned out to be longer by 20 to 30 feet. Thus, of the biggest dragons seen in the show so far, including Caraxes, Meleys ranks second only to Vhagar. According to the Westerosi historians, Meleys had the potential to fight against Vhagar alone, owing to her agility and speed. How does Meleys' speed and agility compare to other dragons? Meleys is said to be the swiftest dragon of her time, being significantly more agile than her contemporaries such as Vhagar and Caraxes. And this is around 75 AC, when she was the mount of Alyssa Targaryen. Vhagar is known more for her size, which sort of slows her down in comparison with smaller dragons. If there was one dragon that could compete with Meleys in terms of speed, that would be Caraxes. But Meleys still had a faster flight speed than Caraxes, aka the Bloodworm, because of her ferocious nature. Decades later, during the events of House of the Dragon, Meleys has slowed down because of her age, but she's still a formidable force while flying around with Rhaenys. The other significant dragons that appear in House of the Dragon are Syrax and Sunfire, who do not stand a chance against the bigger, faster Meleys. Syrax, ridden by Rhaenyra Targaryen, is not particularly known for its speed, and neither is Sunfire. But at the battle in Rook's Rest, Meleys loses the fight against Sunfire and Vhagar because it was 1 against 2. In fact, during the initial clash, she had ripped apart Sunfire's wing and had almost killed it, But Vhagar interfered and things went south for Meleys. Vhagar was out of the battle for most of the time, and had she stayed away any longer, Rhaenys and Meleys would have completely destroyed Aegon with his dragon Sunfire. If we're to compare Daemon Targaryen's success on the comparatively slower dragon Caraxes against Vhagar, and Rhaenys' defeat on the once swiftest Meleys against Vhagar and Sunfire together, we have to take into account that Daemon went into battle knowing Vhagar was going to be his opponent. But Rhaenys and Meleys were ambushed by Vhagar and Sunfire, and hence the element of surprise played a key role in their defeat. Meleys is known as the Red Queen. What's unique about her scales and coloration? Do they hint at any specific strengths, like fire resistance, or weaknesses, like vulnerability to certain attacks? Westerosi scholars had 2 words to describe Meleys: magnificent and splendid. Part of Meleys' enigma came from her red scales and her pink membraned wings, which earned her the name the Red Queen. Meleys' scarlet scales were complemented by copper-hued horns, crest, and claws. Meleys' head is surrounded by a crest of horns, which flutter menacingly when she's letting out a roar or blasting out flames. As an ancient dragon who's been around since the time of Vhagar, Meleys was among the largest of the beasts and proved to be extremely durable, only slightly weakened in speed because of age. During the battle at Rook's Rest, the soldiers of Sir Criston Cole launched a barrage of weaponized projectiles at Meleys. The archers rained down arrows, while the Scorpion war weapon fired iron bolts at Meleys. Now, the Scorpion bolts have proved extremely lethal against other dragons, such as Meraxes and Stormcloud, but in Meleys' case, her scales proved pretty resistant against them. Though she was unharmed, Meleys was visibly angered by the attacks, and in retaliation, she gurgled out dragon fire and charred up some 800 knights and horses. Dragon scales are also durable against dragon fire, particularly their own fire breath, and considering Meleys is an older dragon, her scales were presumably more hardened than usual. Archmaester Gildane theorized that if it was a one-on-one battle between Vhagar and Meleys, the Red Queen would have been victorious, but Sunfire's intervention made that impossible. Even before her death, Meleys delivered a few fatal blows to the Greens. While fighting thousands of feet above the ground, Meleys chomped down on Sunfire's neck and destroyed half of Sunfire's wings. Her attacks left Aegon burnt and charred, and with broken bones, who never returned to battle again. Neither Sunfire nor Aegon ever recovered from their wounds, which can be seen as Meleys' revenge. Despite being a much younger dragon, Sunfire was crippled by the injuries inflicted by Meleys, and he eventually died from his stinking wounds later. House of the Dragon showcases dragons with different fire types. What color and intensity is Meleys' fire? As per Westerosi legends, dragons are living incarnations of the element fire, and hence fire can never kill a dragon, and fire is also their biggest weapon. Dragon fire is powerful enough to crack stone, melt iron, and decimate mortal flesh in seconds. In the Game of Thrones lore, dragons are theorized to expel certain fire-generating substances from the tiny tubes placed within the interiors of their mouth, and these substances are volatile in nature, so when a huge amount of these substances combine, the rapid reaction results in a fire breath. However, this anatomical explanation somehow strips a dragon of its magical element and takes away the mystery factor. That's probably why this tiny detail was later eliminated from the show, when the dragons were seen producing fire directly from their throats, instead of from the tubes in their mouth. Having said that, the older a dragon is, the more will be the intensity of its fire breath. We know that Meleys is an old dragon, and hence, it's no wonder that her fireballs were as bright as the sun. In the coronation scene of Aegon II, Meleys had the potential to burn down the newly appointed king and his family, and an entire sept full of supporters of the Greens, ending the war before it started. And fearing this possibility, the king's hand Otto Hightower yelled at the guards to open the gates so that Meleys can fly out of there, and everyone is spared a gory death. Interestingly, the dragons in George R.R. Martin's fantasy universe have differently colored fire breaths. For example, Meleys' blue counterpart, Tessarion the Blue Queen, has a bluish flame that matches her scales, and Sunfire's fiery breath matches her golden-hued scales. Similarly, when it comes to Meleys, her fire breath is a deathly mix of scarlet and yellow, which complements the red sheen on her scales. How does Meleys' rider experience impact her performance? While it's established that dragons cannot be tamed completely, they can be trained to follow some basic commands, and the best way to do that is when they're well fed. A hungry and tired dragon will lay waste to everything around them, and Rhaenys knew this very well. That's why when she returned to Dragonstone after flying over hundreds of miles of open sea, she insisted that Meleys needs to rest and feed before she can fly out again. Since the early days of her bonding with Meleys, Rhaenys has taken her out to every crucial venture around Westeros. In House of the Dragon, Rhaenys flies into King's Landing riding on Meleys, and makes sure that she leaves with Meleys, even at the cost of crashing Aegon's coronation. In the books, Meleys and Rhaenys both die fighting Aemond and Aegon's dragons, which is a testament to their inseparable bond. Meleys' first rider was Rhaenys' aunt Alyssa Targaryen, who too had the soul of a warrior, and loved roaming the skies on her dragon. Alyssa is known to have taken both her sons, Viserys and Daemon, on dragon rides, merely days after they were born. And in Alyssa Targaryen's time, Meleys was the fastest dragon dragon around, even beating the speeds of Caraxes and Vhagar. The show hints at varying levels of intelligence among dragons. Are there any moments that suggest Meleys has a particular connection with its rider Rhaenys? As seen through the ages, dragons have a mind of their own, and they cannot really be made to do things unless they want to. While they can be trained with certain commands, the most dangerous of them being Dracarys, which means dragon fire, dragons would only carry out the instructions upon their own will. Interestingly, however, when dragons connect with their riders, it's almost as if they can anticipate their needs and read their minds. We keep coming back to the coronation scene of Aegon II, when Rhaenys and Meleys emerged out of the dragon pit through the floor of the royal sept. At this moment, Rhaenys could have very well instructed Meleys to burn up the greens, but she showed restraint, and so did her dragon. Meleys was in fact fuming with anger, which is exactly how Rhaenys was feeling, thus showing that dragons have an emotional and spiritual connection with their riders. While Rhaenys delivered a death stare to Alicent Hightower, Meleys let out a menacing roar, and interestingly enough, Meleys did not even require a command for it. She seemed to identify Rhaenys' captors, and decided to spare them, as that's what Rhaenys wanted, by flying off to Rhaenyra in Dragonstone. Both Rhaenys and Meleys announced where their true allegiance lay. Can Meleys reproduce? The dragons are a symbol of power for the Targaryens, and if there's something more precious than these beasts in all of Westeros, it would be dragon eggs. So to put it simply, dragons do reproduce through eggs, and Meleys would be no different. However, hatching dragon eggs is a tricky process. Dragon eggs have hardened, stone-like shells with scales all over them. They're about the size of a rugby ball, and have to be carried by both hands because of their weight. In House of the Dragon, Daemon Targaryen is overjoyed to find 3 eggs on Dragonstone, laid by Rhaenyra's dragon Syrax. He immediately places them in a heating chamber, hoping that the eggs would hatch in time. Typically, dragon eggs must be placed in raging fires for them to be hatched, as seen in both the HBO TV shows. But as per Westerosi legends, the hatching of dragon eggs also requires some sort of blood magic, the logic being the sacrifice of a living thing by fire will be replaced by a creature of fire. In Game of Thrones, Daenerys Targaryen was able to hatch 3 dragons from eggs that were laid decades ago and were thought to be lifeless. Daenerys arranged for a funeral pyre and placed the dragon eggs along with her husband and son's dead bodies. A 3rd human also died by fire that night, Mirri Maz Duur, the Magi. By the end of the night, all 3 deaths were replaced by the hatching of Daenerys' 3 dragons, Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal, thus proving that blood magic plays a crucial role in bringing the creatures to life. It was a Targaryen tradition to keep a dragon egg in the cradle of a newborn. If the egg hatched, it would mean the baby is a true Targaryen, and the newborn and the dragon would bond for life. But if the egg remained solid, or if the dragon turned out to be a weakling, it was considered a bad omen. So how do dragons conceive their eggs? The exact details of dragon reproduction faded from memory and record, after dragons would extinct for centuries, but the theory and lore points toward a few possibilities. In the books, Maesters Gildain and Yandel debate that dragons who don't lay eggs are male, while the ones who do are female. There's some confusion and argument around the idea that dragons can alter their genders. Anyway, if we're to read the signs, the dragon Vermithor was often seen in the company of Silverwing, and the two were known to coil together, which suggests some sort of mating bond between these two. Going by that theory, it can be assumed that Meleys and Caraxes were born out of Vermithor and Silverwing's mating rituals. Because Meleys and Caraxes were born around the same time, Vermithor and Silverwing's respective riders, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, were also busy expanding their family. When the Targaryens left Valyria and their dragons, it included a young Balerion, while Vhagar and Meraxes hatched from their eggs later. After the death of Meraxes, the next dragon that hatched was Quicksilver, which greatly resembled Meraxes. Thus, one can assume that Quicksilver was a result of Balerion and Meraxes mating. Vhagar also presumably laid the egg of Vermithor, as both of them are gigantic bronze dragons, and both are infamous for their tempers. If these theories check out, then Meleys can very well be the progenitor of Sunfire, as both of them have pink wing membranes. Moreover, Tessarion, despite being a blue dragon, has copper scales on its underbelly, just like Meleys, suggesting Tessarion too was conceived by Meleys, and an unidentified dragon mate. What are the weaknesses of Meleys? Meleys once used to be the fastest dragon in Westeros. This is when she had Princess Alyssa as her rider. But over the years, it is said that Meleys has slowed down, particularly because of age-related lethargy. But when summoned powerfully, Meleys is still roused as a fearful beast, and has the potential to give Vhagar a run for her money. Meleys' age-related weaknesses show up early on the 2nd season of House of the Dragon. After Lucerys Velaryon is killed by Aemond in the mid-air Battle of Dragons, Lucerys falls to his death on his way back to Dragonstone. Following the mishap, Princess Rhaenys rides out on Meleys and scouts hundreds of miles of open sea to ensure that the water routes are inaccessible for the Greens. Upon her return to Dragonstone, she insists that Meleys needs to gorge and rest before she can venture out again. So slowing down and requiring more rest are the two age-related vulnerabilities of Meleys. But if we're to look at dragons in general, they do have a few weak points that can be fatal to them. For example, dragons are often weakened by poison and attacks from other dragons. Only a dragon can pierce another one's scales and flesh, which is made apparent when Vhagar pounced upon the much smaller Arax in the mid-air attack that killed Lucerys. Arax was completely sliced up in pieces by Vhagar's attack, as one of its severed wings was later discovered by Rhaenyra. According to Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones, who read up a lot on dragons, a dragon can be killed by piercing its eyes deep enough to rupture its brain. The dragon Meraxes, which belonged to the wife of Aegon the Conqueror, was precisely killed this way by the Dornish when they shot a scorpion bolt through his eye. Is Meleys immortal? Meleys is surely one of the oldest dragons after Vhagar, hatched during the reign of King Jaehaerys Targaryen I. But immortality is not a trait that the dragons of George R.R. Martin's fantasy universe have. In fact, Meleys was one of the first immensely powerful dragons to die in the lore. We mentioned that the Greens laid a trap for Rhaenys and her dragon Meleys at Rook's Rest, and here's the full story of how Meleys fell to her death. Rook's Rest is located across the sea from the island castle of Dragonstone, which was the base for Rhaenyra Targaryen and the Blacks. Once the Dance of Dragons civil war started between Aegon II's Greens and Rhaenyra's Blacks, Princess Rhaenys was deployed to protect the Blacks' fleet of ships around Dragonstone and Driftmark. She circled the skies, watching out for the Greens' fleet, ready to burn them down with Meleys' fire breath. As a strategy, the Greens decided to single out Meleys, and designed a trap in Rook's Rest. Planned by Sir Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard and the new Hand of the King, the Greens tortured and killed the small folk of Rook's Rest, prompting the Lord of Rook's Rest to send out a plea for help to the neighboring Dragonstone. 9 days later, help arrived in the form of Princess Rhaenys riding on Meleys. By this time, Criston Cole had an ambush in place and attacked Meleys with scorpion bolts and arrows. And while Meleys survived the artillery attacks, she was put in a 1-against-2 situation when Vhagar and Sunfire appeared in the sky above her. Rhaenys knew she was headed for doom, and instead of flying away, she and Meleys turned around to face their enemies in the sky. Unable to resist the dual attacks, Meleys was fatally injured by the combined fire breaths of Vhagar and Sunfire, and crash-landed on the ground. In a tear-jerking moment, Meleys died with her body coiled around Princess Rhaenyra's burnt corpse. Marvelous verdict. The deaths of Princess Rhaenys and her dragon Meleys delivered a huge blow to the Blacks during the Dance of the Dragon Civil War. It weakened Rhaenyra's faction by taking away 2 of her most daunting warriors. The death of these major characters also highlighted the devastating power of the dragons in warfare. However, Meleys will forever be remembered as the majestic and powerful dragon, fiercely loyal to Princess Rhaenys, protecting her even in death. Symbolically, Meleys' legacy mirrors the grandeur and tragedy that defines much of the Targaryen history, an empire that fell after the dragon stopped existing. What do you think about this Scarlet Queen of the Skies? Is Meleys your favorite dragon from Westeros? Please let us know in the comments section below. That's it for now, folks, but please stay tuned as we'll be back with more House of the Dragon content right on this channel. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone!